In our lesson for March the 20th, we continue in our study of chapter 2 in the book of Acts. So look that passage up, the last part beginning in verse 42, and we'll focus on that in this lesson. One of the most influential books written during the last part of the 20th century was a book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. He spent about 5 years researching with his research team American businesses, American corporations that move from good to great and maintain that level of excellence for a period of 15 years. And after drawing all of this research together, he drew out 5 principles, 5 explanations for these companies that moved from good to great, and he wrote about them in his book. Now, when that book came out, many church people, many church spokesmen took that idea and began to apply it to the church. And they began to study churches and try to discern what were the principles that enabled a church to move from good to great and to maintain that level of excellence over a period of time. I read several of those books, and there were some helpful insights in them, to be sure. But the more I read these books, the more I was kind of drawn back to the book of Acts, because in the book of Acts, I think we have a clear picture of the principles that will enable a church to move from good to great and maintain that over a period of time. And one of the key passages that does that is the one we're looking at in this week's lesson. In a sense, Acts chapter 2, verses 41 to 47 gives us some of the basic principles that will enable a church to move from good to great. So what are those principles, or what is that we need to know about the church to be able to accomplish that? Well, first of all, Roman numeral 1, he talks about the activities of the church. A church of excellence does certain things, and we see those reflected in verse 41. He says, first of all, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. So the first century church, this church of excellence here in the book of Acts, is what I would call a learning church. I remember a story about some parents whose little child fell out of bed at night and started crying, and they ran into the room to see what happened, and they asked him how he fell out of bed. And the little boy said to his parents, he said, "I guess I fell asleep too close to where I got in." Well, that happens to a lot of Christians. We get in, we're part of the church, but we fall asleep too close to where we get in. Much more accurate approach, or effective approach, would be the one suggested by a man I read several years ago. He said, to study infinity requires, to study eternity requires infinity. In other words, we never will be able to learn everything we need to learn about how to be a Christian, how to do church, how to carry out His work, how to witness. And instead of being fixated children who fall asleep too close to where we come in, we need to commit ourselves, as the disciples did, to continually devoting ourselves to the apostles' teaching. It was a learning church. It was also a fellowshipping church. They not only learned what they needed to learn, they also got along with each other. They related to each other. It says they devoted themselves to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread. Now, the word fellowship here is the word koinonia. It's a word we're probably familiar with. But it means more than just cookies and punch and fellowship hall after church. It's not that. The word carries with it the idea of being involved in a partnership with each other. So it's more than just community. It's also a partnership in which we work together. I love the definition of fellowship given by a little boy in Sunday school. Teacher said, "Does anybody know what that is?" And the little boy